Father, we thank you for this day, and I pray, Lord, that you'll open our eyes to behold wondrous things out of your law. Use your word, I pray, in our lives. And I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. If you would have your Bibles open to Exodus chapter 18. Exodus chapter 18. I'm treading on thin ice tonight. There are two things that in this country that really be offensive. One is religion and the other is politics. I'm going to mix those tonight. We're discussing as we go through this is the last in our installment, or our series, the last installment of our series entitled Current Culture, dealing with just current events and how we respond to them. And so I don't know what could be more of a current event than voting. And so we're going to discuss voting. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for or who not to vote for, but I want to discuss principles by which we as Christians can know how to vote. And that will affect, I think I could stand up here and tell you who to vote for, and that would just defeat the purpose, because then everybody would just be voting according to my opinion. And I think it's more important that we know what we're voting for. All right, so I want to give you a quote before we get started here from a politician who sought to win the support of the evangelical church. And I want to see if you can guess who said this. I'm just going to give you a partial quote. It says, "My feelings as a Christian point me to my Lord and Savior." Can you guess which politician, according to the evangelical vote, said this? If you guessed Adolf Hitler, you guessed correctly. All right? Adolf Hitler said that in a speech in April 12, 1922. And, of course, Adolf Hitler claimed to be a Christian and often quoted people like Martin Luther and things like that, because he lived in a country that was Lutheran. All right? This is an extreme example. I'm not pulling the Hitler card on any of our current politicians, all right? There's kind of a rule of thumb when having a debate, and the first person to say Adolf Hitler loses. And it's just kind of like you've just gone as extreme as you can. So I'm not doing that. I'm not pulling the Hitler card. But this quote from him really highlights the fact that politicians will say anything they need to gain popular support. Whether they believe it or not, whether it's true or not, they will say anything. I remember up in Michigan, we had a special day at our church, and I forget what it was for, but we had several politicians that came to that meeting. It's actually kind of neat. I got to meet a couple of politicians. That was a big deal for me at the time as a teenager. And I remember one of them, or a couple of them, getting up and talking about their deep religious faith. But when they went to cast their votes in legislature, they voted against everything the Bible ever stood for. So they were different people in the church than they were in, I think it's Lansing in Michigan. This ought not to be the case, but it is. And if you're like me, you've grown weary of hearing the concrete principles and convictions that a candidate is standing for as they run for office, who after receiving your vote, they go to elected office and stand for nothing that they promised. And they cave on everything. This has been discouraging for sure, but Christians ought to go to the polling place and cast a vote. We ought not to sit out. We may not like our choices, but we ought to vote, not just for president, but for every elective office at the state, federal, and local level. That way, we ought to make our voices heard. Now, how can we know who to vote for? How do we know? Like I said, they say one thing and do another, right? How do we know who to vote for? Many people this year are more focused on who they are voting against than who they are voting for. But how do we know who to vote for? Can we know most politicians by what they say? Well, no, all right? Can we trust everything we read in the news and on the internet? No. I think Abraham Lincoln has a quote that says, never trust anything you see on the internet, all right? And I'm pretty sure that's true. Can we just vote out all the incumbents? Just vote out all the bums and trust the new guys to come in and do a better job. Well, I think we've had a couple of waves of that in the past, 10, 15 years, and it doesn't seem to work either. So how do we know who to vote for? Well, if we vote with this principle in mind, I think it'll help us make the right decisions as God would have us to do. Here's the principle. Vote for something. Vote for biblical leadership principles. Vote for biblical leadership principles. You need to vote for someone who, not necessarily someone who agrees with everything that you believe right down the line. I mean, you don't need to pull out a doctrinal statement and say, all right, this guy isn't an independent fundamental Baptist, so I guess I can't vote for him. But just take, in a general scope, the person should display a record of sound biblical leadership principles. Exodus chapter 18. In Exodus chapter 18, Moses gets a visit from his father-in-law Jethro. Moses comes from that tribe in Israel that hails from, I believe, Beverly Hills, and his father-in-law Jethro came, and that went over like a lead balloon. But anyway, and Jethro notices that Moses is spending all day, every day, basically in trials, judging people. And so Jethro says, you need to get some help. And Moses says, I'll take your advice. And so Jethro, and so we get here to verse 21, and in this process is described for us the type of leaders that Moses needs to appoint as judges over the people. The type of leadership that should be appointed to help him. We know Moses was a good leader, but look who they're looking at, or what type of people they're looking at here in Exodus chapter 18. And look at verse 21. Moreover, thou shalt provide out of the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, and rulers of hundreds, and rulers of fifties, and rulers of tens. And so we look at these. Here's some biblical leadership principles, all right? And this is, I mean, God chose some special people. Moses, David, Samuel, certainly. Generally, God made some pretty good choices. But as far as just looking at the type of person that God says should be in leadership over a nation, he's talking about people who have ability. All right? A person ought to be able to do the job. Just because a person is honest doesn't mean they're able. But a person ought to have an ability. He says, choose, first of all, able men. They ought to be men that fear God. I don't think I could ever bring myself to vote for an atheist, an avowed atheist. Just because even if they espouse all the right principles, I know that person has in his mind no more higher authority than himself to answer to. But a person ought to, that I'm casting my vote for as a Christian, ought to be a person who displays some fear of God. He may not be exactly in the same boat I am religiously, but a person who looks and says, there is a God that I'm going to answer to, and so I need to take this seriously. A person who doesn't fear God is a person if he's not afraid of God, he's not afraid of anything. And if he's not afraid to offend God, he's not afraid to kill you. And so I would strongly encourage you to look for leaders who fear God. Look for leaders and vote for leaders who have, here's Moses is getting this instruction. Look out for men that have a high regard for the truth. Men of truth. Boy, we have a dearth of truth in our nation. Not just in politics, but all over the country. But you see that especially in people running for office. They'll say one thing and do the other, and And then it gets real bad when the political commercials start coming on. I'm glad we don't live in a battleground state. Go home to visit my parents in Iowa at certain times of the year and certain election cycles, and all you see is political cartoons. Or not cartoons, they should be cartoons, but political commercials. And you see the Democrat runs the political commercial against his Republican opponent, and man, that Republican guy is going to he's going to drop nuclear bombs all over the world, and of course he's going to cut down every tree, and there's the water's going to boil away, and even the moon, the temperature's going to even rise on the moon. I mean, it's just going to be awful. And everybody's going to be in a concentration camp. And then the Republican runs his thing against the Democrat opponent, and man, this is the worst person you've ever seen, and it's going to be Sodom and Gomorrah, and it's going to be socialism and communism, all this. And that all may be true or may not be true, but I take it all, guess what, with a big grain of salt, all right, because of the nature of truth. We ought to look for people with a high regard for truth. And then also, he says, look for men that hate covetousness. Hate covetousness. In other words, someone who's not dishonest where money is concerned. Man, these people are few and far between. Someone has once said that politicians ought to wear race car suits, NASCAR suits. They have all their sponsors just kind of stitched on so you know who's bought them. And I think that goes for both parties. And I think that's accurate. And so look for people who are honest, not dishonest where money is concerned. Now, you need to realize that when you vote, you do not just vote against someone. All right? You don't just vote against someone. You vote for someone. And if millions of Christians endorse leaders who embody biblical leadership principles, those leaders will probably not win every election. They will probably not win many elections. I think the influence and the numbers of the evangelical church in America are vastly overrated. But I do believe that the voice of Jesus Christ will be heard in the ballot box, and I think that is more important than any pragmatic goals. So vote for. When you go to the ballot box, and I think you ought to go. If you don't vote, you don't have a right to complain about who's in there, right? But we've been given a great responsibility. Not very many people in the history of the world have had the ability and the freedom to go and cast a vote for their leadership. And so we ought to take advantage of that. So vote for biblical leadership principles. Vote for men or women that have ability, that fear God, that have a high regard for truth, and that are not dishonest where money is concerned. Now, that brings us to some negative applications to this principle. As I've thought about this, I think if we're going to vote for biblical leadership principles, that means that there are some things we're not going to vote for. For instance, never vote for leaders with wicked policies. Leaders that espouse wickedness, that when they get into office have promised that they are going to do evil. All right? Now, a lot of people will vote for evil leaders who have evil policies because there's something in it for them. The wicked leader has promised that they will do this for this group and this for this group, and by doing that, they are bribing people to vote for them. But we ought to never vote for for leaders with wicked policies. In Jeremiah chapter 5, the prophet Jeremiah knows that God is going to judge Judah. He knows that God is bringing calamity on his land. And Jeremiah is kind of doing what Abraham did with Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham, that story's a little more familiar. Abraham bargains with God, right? If I can find 50 righteous men, don't destroy the place. And he says, then 40, then 30, then he gets it all the way down to 10. And says, I can find 10, please don't destroy the place. Well, Jeremiah is doing the same thing with God, and Jeremiah is basically saying, all right, let me go and see if I can find people that fear God and follow God. And so Jeremiah goes to all the poor people in Jerusalem, and guess what? Every single last one of them is rotten to the core. They have no fear of God. They are idolatrous. And so he finds nobody in the poor district, and Jeremiah says, you know what? They're uneducated. They have not grown up in church. They just haven't learned about the Lord. I'm going to go to the upper class. These guys have had all the advantages. They've had all the training. They certainly will fear the Lord. Listen to Jeremiah's description in Jeremiah chapter 5 and verse 5. He says, I will get me unto the great men, and I will seek unto them, for they have known the way of the Lord and the judgment of their God. So that's his argument. I'm going to look to, these guys have known God. They've known the way of the Lord. But here's the result of his search. He says, but these have altogether broken the yoke and burst the bonds. And he found the great men, the leaders of the people, the princes and the kings and the nobility. He found those in charge to be just as corrupt as everybody else. Later on in the chapter, in verse 26 through 31, he describes their leadership style and their policies. He says, for among my people are found wicked men. They lay wait as he that setteth snares. They set a trap. They catch men. As a cage is full of birds, so are their houses full of deceit. Therefore they are become great and waxen rich. They are waxen fat. They shine. Yea, they overpass the deeds of the wicked. They judge not the cause of the fatherless. Yet they prosper. And the right of the needy do they not judge. Shall I not visit for these things, saith the Lord? Shall not my soul be avenged on a nation such as this? A wonderful and a horrible thing is committed in the land. The prophets prophesy falsely, and the priests bear rule by their names, and my people love to have it so. And what will they do? What will ye do in the end thereof? And what Jeremiah is pointing out, and he's saying that there's wicked men in leadership, and here's their policies. Their policies are deceit. He says their houses are full of deceit. And he says they become great, though. They've been prosperous, and they've made heaps of money, but at the same time they've been wicked. But the prophets prophesy falsely, and they say these men have made all this money because God's blessing is on them. They're not judging the cause of the poor and the fatherless. In other words, they're meting out injustice to the people who can't afford to bribe them. They are in the right of the needy, they do not judge. So there's poor and there's needy people that need the law on their side. They need justice, but they're not getting justice because the men in charge are taking bribes and perverting justice. And so that's their style. That's their policy. It's wicked. In Micah chapter 7, verses 3 and 4, it says, that they may do evil with both hands earnestly, the prince asketh, and the judge asketh for a reward, and the great man, he uttereth his mischievous desire, so they wrap it up. The best of them is as a briar. Most upright is sharper than a thorn hedge. The day of thy watchman and thy visitation cometh, now shall be their perplexity. And so the prophet Micah is again describing the evil that's going on in Judah, and basically the princes and the judges and the great men are taking bribes, and they are living on wicked policies. I don't think that a Christian, a lot of these people didn't have a chance to vote. A lot of that was a result of a different type of system. But it's still the same. The leaders were taking the country down the toilet. So we ought not to vote for leaders with wicked policies. I would never vote for someone who is for abortion. Slaughtering children is evil. It is more of a Holocaust than what Adolf Hitler produced in Germany. Many, many millions more victims. Do not vote for candidates who support Planned Parenthood. By the way, that's both parties. I will not stand for a candidate who supports that evil abortion mill. I would not vote. I don't believe Christians ought to vote for candidates who would expand the operation already in existence of Planned Parenthood. Sexual immorality has become policy in America, and it is a wicked policy. And I will not vote for candidates that support transgender bathroom policies. I will not vote for candidates who support unbiblical forms of marriage. I don't believe Christians ought to vote for candidates who suppress the freedom of religion in favor of the rainbow jihad. It's not fun to say it, but I just don't believe that Christians, as we say, we're going to vote for biblical leadership principles. If that's true, then how could we vote for these policies? Policies that restrict religious freedom or deny the Constitution are wicked. Those who seek to restrict rights granted by the Constitution seek one thing, and that is totalitarianism. They seek tyranny. Why else would they want to take away your rights? Your right to speech, your right to bear arms, your right to assembly, your right to due process, by the way, is on the trading block as we speak. And I would love to say, back in 2008, I voted for the lesser of two evils. I voted for John McCain. I said for a whole year I wouldn't vote for him, and I voted for him. And he's one of the ones now that are trying to take away due process. And I wish, going back, I just wish I could say I didn't vote for John McCain, but I did. And so there are men and women who seek to take away your constitutional privileges, and not privileges, rights. They think they're privileges. And those people are living on wicked policies. So do not vote for leaders who espouse wicked policies if we are going to vote for biblical leadership principles. As we vote for biblical leadership principles, never vote for leaders who are personally wicked. Not only if they espouse wicked policies, but if they are personally wicked. I'll get into the verses here in just a second. Why shouldn't we? Well, because a spade is a spade. All right? A wicked ruler will rule how? Wickedly. All right? A corrupt tree will not bear good fruit, because a vote is a personal endorsement. That's another reason not to vote for people who are personally wicked. Proverbs 17 verse 15 says, "He that justifieth the wicked and he that condemneth the just, even they both are an abomination to the Lord." Proverbs 17:23 says, "A wicked man taketh a gift out of the bosom to pervert the ways of judgment." Proverbs 18:5 says, "It is not good to accept the person of the wicked, to overthrow the righteous in judgment." Proverbs 24:24 says, "He that saith to the wicked, Thou art righteous, him shall the people curse. Nations shall abhor him." Proverbs 28 and verse 4, "They that forsake the law praise the wicked, but such as keep the law contend with them." Proverbs 28:15, "As a roaring lion and as a raging bear, so is a wicked ruler over the poor people." Proverbs 29 verse 2 says, "When the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice, but when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn." There's much more in the Bible about wicked rulers. Ahab was a wicked ruler. He was personally wicked and brought destruction on his people. And we could go on, but I think that's enough. Personally wicked candidates are those whose lives are characterized by gross sin. It doesn't mean that every candidate you vote for is going to have a squeaky clean record. No man is perfect. No woman is perfect. And many of them are deeply flawed. But when I say a personally wicked candidate, I'm talking about someone whose life is marked by immorality, unrepentant immorality, or financial dishonesty, or illegal and shady activities, or perjury and other forms of dishonesty. In other words, wickedness is a character trait for that candidate. Personally, again, I'm putting these in a lot of imperatives. You can vote for whoever you want to. It's a free country, and I believe in individual soul liberty, and we can still be friends. But personally, I believe as a Christian When we vote for people who are personally wicked, then we, in essence, endorse that person's personal wickedness. And we say, this person can live this way and be this way, and I will vote for them. It doesn't matter. Never vote for a candidate who is personally wicked. As we vote for biblical leadership principles, we ought to demonstrate a trust in the Lord. I mean, it all really comes down to what we believe in, who we vote for. So when we vote, never vote for or never cast a vote of no confidence in the Lord. Don't go to the ballot box and say, I trust candidate A more than I trust God. Don't go there and say, all right, Lord, I'm casting a vote of no confidence in you. Psalm 118, verses 8 and 9 says, it is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man. But it goes on to say, it is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in princes. You know, leadership, people in elected office. The nation of Israel faced a political crisis, and their leadership was thoroughly corrupt in many times. And so what did they do? Most of the time they did what was politically expedient, and that led to disaster. In doing so, they cast a vote of no confidence in the Lord. And I'm thinking of one example in 1 Samuel chapter 8. In 1 Samuel chapter 8, and verses 1 through 7 and verse 19 and 20 read this. And it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. Now the name of the firstborn was Joel, and the name of the second Abiah. They were judges in Beersheba, and his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre and took bribes and perverted judgment. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together and came to Samuel unto Ramah, and said unto him, behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the other nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed unto the Lord. And the Lord said unto Samuel, hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they say unto thee, for they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. A little while later it says, nevertheless the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel and said, nay, but we will have a king over us, that we may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. Now, that's what Israel did. Too many Christians are putting confidence in this candidate or that candidate. And although you ought to have some confidence in who you vote for, I mean, you don't go to the poll and say, I have no confidence in this person. All right, I'll push the button here. That's not what I'm espousing. But I think we put too much confidence in that. We don't need a political resurgence. We need a revival. And I believe that God can bring revival if Donald Trump is in office, and I believe that God can bring revival if, God forbid, the traitor is in office. God can bring revival in both cases. And if they both go to jail for financial fraud, and they both should, and somebody else comes along, guess what? God is big enough and strong enough to bring revival in America no matter who is in charge. All right? Too many Christians are trying to justify this one or that one on both sides of that. You probably have friends that go to church that would vote for the traitor, and you probably may have heard some arguments from that. But what it is a vote of no confidence in the Lord. When we vote for ungodly leadership, we say to God, in essence, I trust this wickedness more than I trust your holiness and your power and your sovereignty. That's what Israel did. They had a real problem. I mean, if you look at 1 Samuel chapter 8, they do have a real problem. I mean, Eli's sons before that were wicked. And they were immoral. I mean, people were going to worship at the tabernacle, and there was immorality going on, and they were taking bribes, and people hated to go to worship because of Eli's sons, and they were next in line to be judges. But then God stepped in and killed them. All right? But then a few years later, Samuel is the I guess he's the judge. We'll call him president for now. But Samuel's the president, and he's got his two sons coming behind him, and guess what? They're wicked. And the people of Israel are saying, the system's broke. We got to blow it up. We got to do something different, Samuel. But their solution focused on a king, not on God. And guess who they got? Saul. All right? And Saul was a typical president. The first half of his term was pretty good. And then when he became a lame duck, it all went downhill from there, right? And so their solution was not focused on God. What will happen if God's people do not vote according to God's principles? Voila. We know what will happen because it's been going on for a long time. And God has rewarded us according to our sin, just like He did to Judah when they forsook Him. Isaiah chapter 3, the prophet Isaiah, God is prophesying through him and describing what He's going to do to Judah, or what He is doing to Judah as a result of them turning their back on Him. And He says this, and I will give children to be their princes. Whoa. Yeah, I think we're there. All right? We have children sitting where adults should be sitting, in seats of honor and prestige and authority. He says, I'll give children to be their princes, and babes shall rule over them. And the people shall be oppressed, every one by another, and every one by his neighbor. And the children shall behave themselves proudly against the ancient, and the base against the honorable. As for my people, verse 12, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. O my people, they which lead thee cause thee to err, and destroy the way of thy paths. And what God is saying is, because Judah has forsaken me, I am giving them their punishment, and it's coming in waves. And one of the first waves is you've got kids, you've got children ruling over you, people with no qualifications, people with no leadership ability. I say all that to say this: vote for something. Vote for biblical principles. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. If you go to the poll and vote for Donald Trump, then we're still friends, and you're still a member of our church. And some of you are going to do that, and you're thinking, well, that's better than the alternative. And I understand that logic. I understand that logic. But when you go to the polls, pray about it and say, God, not who would you have me to vote for? What would you have me to vote for? All right, and that is, I've already chosen who I'm going to vote for, and I'm not going to tell you from the pulpit. But if you do want to know, I'll tell you. There's someone in the race that I believe represents me. He won't win, but I'm gonna vote for him. But if I'll tell you if you want to know later. But and you vote for who you believe God should vote for. But we all should vote. I believe the voice of Christ should be heard in the ballot box every time there's an election. But vote for biblical principles of leadership. All right, let's.